Today on Know the Truth with Philip De Courcy.
Joseph said no to the solicitation, and that's what's refreshing about this. When many in his situation may have said yes, with his heart he refused. This wasn't a crisis of circumstances. This wasn't a crisis of culture. This was a crisis of commitment. And Joseph was committed to walking in the will of God.
When temptation strikes, the most important word in your vocabulary is no. Welcome to Know the Truth, where today Pastor Philip De Courcy shares a lesson from Genesis chapter 39, revealing how Joseph's refusal of Potiphar's wife offers timeless wisdom for our temptation-filled world. We're discovering the three-part strategy that helped Joseph stay pure 4,000 years ago and still works today. If there are little ears around, you may want to listen on your own time by visiting ktt.org. Here's Pastor Philip.
Well, let's take our Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter 39. We're going to take time to read the whole chapter together. We're continuing on in our series of studies in the life of Joseph entitled Severe Mercy. And we're reminding ourselves in so many ways that sometimes God allows those things He hates to accomplish those things He loves. And God works all things together in our life for our good and for His glory. And we're going to see that in different ways along the way. But we started a journey with Joseph, and we're picking up here in chapter 39 as he's sold into slavery. Now, Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had he put under his authority. So it was, from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me, but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her, to lie with her, or to be with her. But it happened about this time, when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. And so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, "See, he has brought in to us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened when he had heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside. So she kept his garment with her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with words like these, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to me to mock me. So it happened as I lifted my voice and cried out that he left his garment with me and fled outside. So it was when his master heard the words which his wife spoke to him, saying, Your servant did to me after this manner, that his anger was aroused. Then Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were confined. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. There's a number of things I think the text teaches us. A number of headings I want to gather our thoughts around. If you're taking notes, we're going to first of all look at the proposal, then we're going to look at the refusal, and then we're going to look at the libel. There's something refreshing about this story. It's timeless in terms of its reality, but it's rather untimely and refreshing in terms of this young man's response. And I think he has a lot to say to us. Let's just look first of all at the proposal. We'll find it in verse 7. Joseph has been sold into slavery. He's been bought by a captain of the guard, an Egyptian by the name of Potiphar. And he finds himself in Potiphar's home, and the Lord is with him. And the Lord finds favor with Joseph, and Joseph finds favor with Potiphar because of God's favor. And things are looking a little bit up. And into the midst of this, we find injected this proposal to sexual enticement and sexual entrapment. In fact, she said, lie with me. As we look at this proposal, let's not forget that Joseph was in the full flush of youthful vigor. He was a red-blooded young man, and this temptation must have been very real. He was handsome, he was intelligent, he was engaging, he was personable, and he had caught the eye of Potiphar's wife, or we might call her Mrs. Robinson. It's a very real temptation, and it came with great opportunity, because it came when no one was in the house and the master was away. That's the proposal. It's the proposal to enjoy sexual fulfillment outside the will of God. Now, as we look at this proposal, I want to see a couple of things about it. One, its timing, and secondly, its timelessness. Verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that the proposal was made. What things? Well, we're told that indeed Joseph had caught the eye of his master. He had won his master's trust, and Potiphar had put under Joseph's authority all the matters of the house. And I'm sure there were some privileges that came to Joseph because of that. And that's the timing of this proposal. It comes to him with a measure of vulnerability. F.B. Meyer says concerning this, we may expect temptation in days of prosperity and ease rather than in those of privation and toil. Not where men frown, but where they smile. Exquisite smiles of flattery. It is there that the temptress lies in wait. Beware, if thou goest armed anywhere, thou must above all goest armed here. I want you to notice its timing. It comes at a time of prosperity, when things were looking up. And I think you and I just, as it relates to temptation in general, perhaps this temptation in particular, the timing is always interesting. When Satan tempted the Lord Jesus and the Lord Jesus refused to cave into that temptation, we read in Luke chapter 4, verse 13, that the devil left him until a more opportune time. The devil likes to pick his moment. The world waits till we're vulnerable to pounce. The devil looks for an unguarded moment, and it can come when we're down, or it can come when we're up. It can come when we're down because then we're tempted to doubt God, or it can come when we're up and we're left trusting in ourselves. But I want you to notice simply its timing. This was a very real and appealing temptation. Came at a time of vulnerability with great opportunity to a young man who has natural instincts and God-given drives. And I think you and I need to be alert to that fact, whether at a time of adversity or a time of advancement. You and I need to be on our guard. As Peter says, always sober and always vigilant, because our enemy goes about seeking whom he may devour. And there are different times the enemy might come to us, especially as it relates to sexual temptation. He might come at particular seasons in life, midlife, when we've kind of settled down into a routine. He might come at certain times in the day, say late at night, when we're tired, letting our guard down, not watching what we're watching. It even may come at points of failure, when you've already failed and you might rationalize to yourself, you know what? What's one more sin? There's all sorts of ways in which Satan can pick his moment to pounce. F.B. Meyer makes an argument, you know what? You need to be on your guard just as much in times of prosperity as in times of adversity. But just note the timing of it. And the Bible does note the timing of it. It came to pass after these things that the master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph. We need to be aware of this proposal. It's very real. It's repeated, and certainly something that we have some understanding of in our culture. We live in a culture that just badgers us and bears us to engage in casual sex without commitment. If there's one imperative, it's simply that you protect yourself. But that protection is no protection. Certainly no protection against the wrath of God and the emptiness of living outside His will. But not only do we see its timing, I want you to see its timelessness. Does this text not describe a scene that, while it may date back some 4,000 years, it's a scene out of the latest soap opera? It's the storyline of Hollywood's latest blockbuster. That's a fact. This is the stuff that's written about in magazines. This is the stuff that's the storyline of novels and the theme of movies. Casual sex on the basis of physical attraction. And I think the thing we want to take from this is we're reading a story some 4,000 years ago, but it reminds us that we're not the first generation to deal with this problem or to face this temptation. In fact, if we're not careful, you would think we're the ones that invented sex, that we're the only generation that has truly thought about it or had to deal with its problems and its perplexities. This is timeless. It reminds us that this is a scene from last night's TV show. And we're not the first generation to have to deal with this trap or with this temptation. No, as with Joseph, every generation will be brought to the crossroads between opportunity for casual sex and obedience to God, between right and wrong, between promiscuity and propriety, between God's demands and our desires. Now, this is timeless. But you know, his response is rather untimely. And that's what, to me, is rather refreshing about this proposal. We see its timing. We're now looking at its timelessness. But Joseph's response is rather refreshing. And it speaks to us, since he faced the same temptation as we do, Do we respond in the same way he did? I don't want to minimize the seismic change in our culture. The old morality has been thrown out. The moors that held us together as a society now have been broken, and we live in a culture adrift on a sea of relativism. But in saying that, essentially, there's nothing new under the sun. Joseph lived in a very sexually loose and lewd culture. And that's why we look at this and we can identify with it. There's something that's timeless about it. But there's something refreshing about Joseph's stance. And what's refreshing about it is its challenge. We want to make excuses for our sin, don't we? Given the change in our culture, I'm hearing a lot of talk about, you know what, we need to try and understand what our young people are up against. And there's a truth to that. But as long as we don't infer by that statement that, you know, we're going to cut them some slack or we're going to give them a break. In fact, just a number of months ago, we had to deal with a situation in our MAPS program where we brought an outside speaker in, and she spoke to the mothers about how they ought to help educate their children about sex and sexuality, and some of that was appropriate. For a time, she spoke about the desirability to encourage our young people to abstinence and to fight against the push of the world. But to our surprise, and something we had to chastise her about and go back and apologize to our ladies about, was that before she was done, she made this statement: but given the nature of sexual temptation, we do need to teach our children how to protect themselves. That's a rather shocking statement for a Christian teacher to make in the light of Ephesians 5:3, where we're told that the kind of behavior of the world is not even to be named among us. Of course the temptation's real. Of course the temptation's repeated. Of course some of the things that stood as bulwarks and barriers a generation ago have been removed. But I think Joseph teaches us we don't need to make excuses for our sin. Here's a young man who refuses the seduction of Potiphar's wife. Here's a young man who pushes back as the world pushes in. And I think Joseph is a challenge to us. The sin is timeless, but his reaction is fresh and challenging and cuts no slack to us. That if we will live for the glory of God, if we will draw upon the grace of God, we can stay pure. We can protect sex by the fear of God, by a respect for marriage, and by a desire to enjoy it within the protection of God's will itself. That's the proposal. It's timing, it's timelessness. What about the refusal? Joseph said no to the solicitation. And that's what's refreshing about this. He wanted to avoid another pit. He had already experienced one pit, but he sees in this approach and appeal by Potiphar's wife another pit, a pit that's spoken about in Proverbs 23. Proverbs 23 and verse 27. Here's what we read. For a harlot is a deep pit, and a seductress a narrow well. She also lies in wait as for a victim, and increases the unfaithful among men. His refusal here is refreshing. When many in his situation may have said yes. After all, this was a very real and appealing temptation. Joseph had no helps to holiness. He had no small group to keep him accountable. He had no recourse to the government to file a sexual harassment case. He was far from home. He was vulnerable. There was great opportunity. But he refuses. I think there's a few things we want to notice. First of all, we want to notice that with his heart, he refused. Secondly, we want to notice with his mind, he reasoned. And thirdly, we want to notice with his feet, he retreated. That's his game plan. And it worked then, and I think it'll work now. With his heart, he refused. This wasn't a crisis of circumstances. This wasn't a crisis of culture. This was a crisis of commitment. And Joseph was committed to the glory of God, to keeping the law of God, to walking in the will of God. I'm told there are 490,000 words in the English language, plus 300,000 technical terms. That's nearly 800,000 words in all, but the most neglected word in the English language is the word no. We need to learn to say no in so many ways and in so many things. And do you realize that according to Titus 2, verse 12, that the grace of God teaches us to say no to ungodliness? And the grace of God was operating in Joseph's life, and it taught him to say no. Joseph knew what God expected. He knew God's standards, and by God's grace, he had committed to keeping them. And that was something that Joseph didn't make his mind up at that moment. This was a deep-seated commitment. This was something that was part and parcel of who and what he was. And we need young people who will say no and not abuse God's gift of sex. We need young people who will say no, who have made an exclusive commitment to another person. We need couples going through the uncertain waters of middle life to say no to the temptation to ruin a testimony built over years. We need to learn to say no. Joseph refused. With his heart, he refused. His heart was in love with God, and it evidenced itself in this commitment. And if we fall in this area, it's not because of a crisis of circumstances, and it's not because of a crisis of culture, it's a crisis of commitment. Who are you committed to? God? And with God's commandments comes God's enablements, and if you're committed to keeping His commands, God is committed to giving you the grace to keep them.
You're listening to Know the Truth with Philip De Courcy, and the start of a message from Genesis 39 titled Protected Sex. To replay or share this message, visit ktt.org. You can also download the KTT app or podcast. Just search for Know the Truth with Pastor Philip De Courcy. Here's Pastor Philip with more to share.
If today's message has stirred something in your heart, know that you're not alone. The team at Know the Truth stands ready to walk alongside you wherever you are in your spiritual journey. Perhaps you recognize your need for the same divine strength Joseph had, strength that comes only through a relationship with Jesus Christ. We'd be honored to pray with you, guide your next steps, and provide resources that strengthen you in your newfound faith. You can call us at 888-644-8811 or send us an email at info@ktt.org. And if it's your first time reaching out to us, then be sure to ask about the free devotional booklet I've written just for you. It's titled 7 Days of Truth, Resting in God's Will. Again, call 888-644-8811 or request your copy online by visiting ktt.org. I'm Philip De Courcy. Join us next time for another edition of Know the Truth.
Today's program was produced and sponsored by Know the Truth Incorporated. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free."